Standing in my childhood kitchen, still wearing my college graduation dress, I watched my father's face turn crimson with rage. "You ungrateful brat, leave this house and don't ever come back." His words hit like physical blows. My mother stood frozen by the sink, my younger brother Jake cowering behind her. All because I'd refused to marry his business partner's son, a man twice my age who made my skin crawl. I grabbed my purse, looked at each of them one final time, and walked out that door forever. The drive to my apartment near campus felt surreal. 20 minutes earlier, I'd been celebrating my business degree graduation. Now I was homeless. The familiar route through downtown seemed different, like I was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. Streetlights blurred past as reality settled in. I'd never see that house again. My apartment building came into view, a modest 2-story complex where I'd lived for 3 years. College students filled the parking lot loading cars for summer break. Everyone seemed so carefree, so normal. I sat in my Honda Civic for 20 minutes engine running, trying to process what had just happened. Inside my apartment, everything looked exactly the same. Textbooks stacked on my desk, photos of high school friends on the dresser. The cap and gown I'd worn hours earlier lay across my bed like a discarded costume from another life. I needed groceries. My refrigerator contained only expired milk and leftover pizza. At the grocery store, I loaded my cart with essentials: bread, peanut butter, instant noodles, orange juice, basic survival items for someone starting over. The total came to $43.67. I handed over my emergency credit card, the one Father had given me 3 years ago, with strict instructions to use only for genuine emergencies. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this card has been declined." The cashier said, her voice apologetic but matter-of-fact. My stomach dropped. "Could you try it again, please? Maybe the machine didn't read it properly." She swiped it twice more. Same result. The line behind me grew longer, filled with impatient sighs and shuffling feet. My face burned with embarrassment as I left the cart and walked to my car empty-handed. I called the bank from the parking lot, hands shaking as I dialed the customer service number. "This is Marcus Sullivan's account," the representative explained after I provided my information. "He called this morning and requested immediate closure. As the primary cardholder, he has full authority to make that decision." The pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. Father hadn't just cut me off emotionally, he'd severed every financial tie. I called my apartment complex next. Rent paid through the end of the month, but Father had canceled the automatic payments. Then my car insurance company. Policy terminated that morning. Cell phone carrier. Service would end at midnight. $312 in cash. That's what remained of my independent existence. I drove back to the apartment, mind racing through options. My college friends had scattered for summer break. Sarah to Europe, Jessica to an internship in California, Michael back to his parents in Oregon. The few local acquaintances I could think of barely knew me well enough for such a massive favor. That first night, I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by bills and bank statements, trying to understand how I'd been so naive. Every payment for 3 years had come from Father's accounts. Tuition, rent, utilities, groceries, all controlled by a man who could cut me off with a single phone call. I thought I was independent, living my own life, making my own choices. Instead, I'd been performing in a play where someone else owned the stage. Sleep came in fragments. Every car door slam in the parking lot made me jump, wondering if Father had changed his mind and come to apologize. But morning arrived with silence and the harsh reality that my life as I'd known it was over. The apartment felt like a museum exhibit now, young woman's life circa last week. I packed everything I could fit in my car: clothes, laptop, a few books, some photos. The furniture belonged to the rental company anyway. At 10 in the morning, I turned in my keys and drove away from the only independent home I'd ever known. The first week living in my car taught me things they never covered in business school: how to find public restrooms that stayed open all night, which parking lots had security cameras for safety, but no guards to ask uncomfortable questions, how to make $3 fast food meals last 12 hours. I found work at Rosie's Diner on Route 9, a 24-hour place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that could dissolve spoons. The manager, Ruth Martinez, hired me on the spot after I explained my situation, though I left out the family drama details. She had kind eyes and calloused hands, the look of someone who'd fought her own battles and won. "You got a place to stay, honey?" Ruth asked during my first break. "Working on it," I lied, stirring sugar into bitter coffee. She studied my face with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen too much. "My cousin owns apartments downtown. Reasonable rent, doesn't ask too many questions about deposits if you're good people." I wanted to cry at her kindness, but tears felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I thanked her and promised to look into it, knowing I'd never qualify without credit history or references. The diner work was harder than any summer job I'd held in college. Truckers ordering complicated breakfasts at 3 in the morning, families with screaming children leaving chaos in their wake, teenagers treating the place like their personal hangout, ordering single sodas and staying for hours. My feet ached constantly, my lower back screamed by closing time, and the smell of grease followed me everywhere. But Ruth was patient, teaching me the rhythm of restaurant work, how to balance 4 plates up your arm without dropping anything, which customers tipped well and which ones would stiff you regardless of service, how to diffuse angry situations with a smile and perfectly timed coffee refills. "You're college educated," Ruth said during my second week, watching me scrub tables with industrial cleaner. "This ain't forever, you know, just until you figure out what's next." I nodded, grateful for her faith in my future when I couldn't see past the next meal. Living in the car grew more challenging as days passed. Summer heat turned the Honda into an oven during daylight hours, forcing me to find air-conditioned spaces, like libraries and shopping malls. Public pools charged admission I couldn't afford, so showers came from gym day passes. I rotated between different locations. Laundry meant hand-washing clothes in gas station bathrooms and hoping they'd dry overnight. My phone died the night Father canceled service. No contact with the outside world except through the diner's landline during breaks. I called Jake once using quarters from my tip jar. "Mandy." His voice cracked with relief. "Where are you? Dad won't tell us anything. Mom's been crying for days." "I'm okay," I said, though standing in a gas station parking lot at midnight didn't feel particularly okay. "Are you all right?" "Dad's acting weird, angrier than usual. He keeps talking about respect and family loyalty. Mom tried to ask about you yesterday and he exploded." The conversation lasted 3 minutes before my quarters ran out. Jake's voice calling my name as the line went dead haunted me for hours. By week 3, malnutrition was taking its toll. Dizzy spells hit without warning. My clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost 15 pounds. Dark circles under my eyes made me look like a ghost of my former self. Ruth noticed, but didn't push, just made sure I ate during my shifts and sometimes accidentally prepared extra orders that needed to be finished before they spoiled. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning. I'd worked a double shift, hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon, and slept maybe 2 hours in the car behind a closed shopping center. Standing at table 6, taking an order from a businessman complaining about his eggs being slightly overcooked, the room started spinning. The last thing I remembered was the sound of breaking dishes as I hit the floor. I woke up in the emergency room at Mercy General, fluorescent lights burning my eyes and the beeping of machines filling my ears. A young doctor with tired eyes and a gentle manner explained that I was severely dehydrated and malnourished. IV fluids dripped into my arm, slowly returning my body to basic functionality. "Do you have insurance?" the admissions nurse asked, clipboard in hand. It was canceled recently. I admitted wondering how much this medical care would cost and where I'd possibly find the money. That's when I heard a familiar voice from the hallway. "Excuse me, I'm looking for Mandy Sullivan. I believe she was brought in this morning." Aunt Sophie walked into my room like an answer to prayers I'd been too proud to speak. Father's younger sister, the family rebel, who'd been persona non grata for as long as I could remember. She was 52 years old with silver-streaked auburn hair and the same stubborn jawline that ran in our family. Her presence filled the sterile hospital room with warmth and possibility. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. Ruth from the diner called me. She's worried sick about you." "How did Ruth know to call you?" I asked, my voice hoarse from dehydration. "Smart woman, that Ruth. She asked around about your family, figured out the connection, and tracked me down." Sophie's eyes held a mixture of sadness and determination. "I heard about what happened with your father." The story spilled out in broken pieces. The graduation confrontation, the financial cutoff weeks of homelessness and desperation. Sophie listened without judgment, occasionally squeezing my hand when emotion threatened to overwhelm me. "Your father hasn't changed much," she said finally. "Still thinks love means control and money equals obedience." "What happened between you two?" I'd always wondered about the family rift, but never dared ask. Sophie's laugh was bitter, but not unkind. 15 years ago, your grandfather tried to arrange my marriage to his business partner's son. Sound familiar? I refused. Your father sided with Dad, and I was officially disowned from the Sullivan family empire. The parallels were staggering, but you survived. More than survived. I built my own life on my own terms. She leaned forward, her expression serious. "I own a bookstore downtown. It's small, struggling, but it's mine. I also have a one-bedroom apartment above the shop. The couch folds out into a decent bed, and there's a shower that actually has hot water." Hope bloomed in my chest for the first time in weeks. "Here's the deal," Sophie continued. "You can stay with me, but this isn't charity. The bookstore needs help, inventory, customer service, marketing, all the things your business degree probably covered. I can't pay much, but it's honest work and a chance to rebuild." "Why would you help me?" I asked, overwhelmed by the unexpected lifeline. "Because someone should have helped me 15 years ago, and they didn't. Because your father's definition of family is toxic, and it's time someone in this bloodline broke the cycle." She stood up, gathering her purse with decisive energy. "Because you deserve better than sleeping in your car and living on diner scraps." That afternoon, I was discharged into Sophie's care. She drove me to the bookstore, a narrow building squeezed between a pawn shop and a pizza place, with chapter and verse books painted in fading gold letters across the window. The apartment upstairs was tiny but clean, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with overflowing bookshelves. "Welcome home," Sophie said, showing me where she kept the extra blankets. For the first time in 3 weeks, I cried, not from despair, but from relief. I wasn't alone anymore. Working at chapter and verse books was like stepping into a different universe. Where the diner had been chaos and grease and demands for faster service, the bookstore moved at a contemplative pace. Customers browsed for hours, asked thoughtful questions about authors and recommendations, and treated books like treasures rather than commodities. Sophie had owned the shop for 12 years, ever since her divorce settlement gave her enough capital for a down payment. The inventory was impressive, but disorganized classics mixed randomly with contemporary fiction. Business books shelved next to poetry. No clear system for finding anything specific. "I know where everything is," Sophie explained on my first morning, "but that doesn't help customers much." My business degree finally felt useful again. I spent the first week creating a proper organizational system, grouping books by genre and author, establishing clear sections that made sense to browsing customers. Sophie watched with amusement as I rearranged entire shelves with systematic precision. "You sure you're Marcus Sullivan's daughter?" she teased. "This level of organization suggests some non-Sullivan DNA." "Maybe I inherited it from you," I suggested, and her smile was worth all the dusty hours of shelf rearranging. The second week, I tackled the store's online presence, or rather its complete absence from the digital world. Sophie viewed computers with suspicion, handling transactions through an ancient cash register that required manual calculation. I set up a basic website, created social media accounts, and started photographing interesting book covers for Instagram posts. "People buy books online?" Sophie asked, watching me type product descriptions. "More every year, but they also use online research to decide which physical bookstores to visit. We want to be the place they choose when they're ready to browse and discover something unexpected." Within a month, online orders started trickling in. Nothing dramatic, but enough to notice in the daily receipts. I created a newsletter for regular customers, organized themed reading events, and reached out to local authors about possible book signings. The work energized me in ways the diner job never could. Each successful display, every satisfied customer, every small improvement to the store's operations felt like rebuilding my life piece by piece. Sophie's trust in my abilities restored confidence that weeks of survival mode had eroded. My favorite discovery was the children's section tucked into a cozy corner with a reading chair and colorful alphabet posters. Kids would spend hours there while parents shopped, getting lost in picture books and early readers. Watching them reminded me why I'd always loved bookstores. They were places where imagination lived and curiosity was rewarded. That's where I met Daniel Foster. He came in every Thursday afternoon browsing the education section for teaching supplies and children's literature. Tall and lanky with dark hair and an easy smile, he taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary and had the patience of someone who genuinely enjoyed 8-year-olds' endless questions. "You're new here," he said during his third visit, approaching the counter with a stack of books about the solar system. "Started last month. I'm Mandy Sophie's niece." Daniel. I wondered who was responsible for actually organizing this place. Sophie's a wonderful woman, but her filing system was creative at best. He had laugh lines around his eyes and spoke about his students with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested teaching was more than just a job for him. When he mentioned needing books for a classroom library fundraiser, I offered to help coordinate donations from our overstock inventory. "You'd do that." His surprise was genuine and touching. "Books and kids belong together. Besides, it's good business. Those students might become future customers." Our partnership started professionally, but grew into something warmer over the following weeks. Daniel would stop by after school to discuss book recommendations, staying longer each time to chat about teaching challenges, small-town politics, and our shared love of mystery novels. He treated books with the same reverence Sophie and I did, understanding that a good bookstore was about more than commerce. It was about creating a space where ideas could flourish. "You seem happier," Sophie observed one evening as we closed the shop together. "I am happier. This place, this work, it feels right." "I'm not just talking about the work," she said with a knowing smile. The comment made me blush, but she wasn't wrong. Daniel represented something I'd never experienced: a man who valued my thoughts, respected my independence, and never tried to control or change me. Our conversations flowed naturally, built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency or family obligation. But the past wasn't finished with me yet. Jake called the bookstore one afternoon in late August, his voice urgent and scared. "Mandy, thank God I found you. Mom gave me this number." Mom. I hadn't heard from my mother since the graduation disaster. "She's been coming to your bookstore. She made me promise not to tell Dad, but she's been visiting for weeks, buying books, talking to your aunt." Jake's words tumbled together in teenage panic. "Mandy, something's wrong. Dad's business is in serious trouble. There are lawyers calling constantly, and he keeps having meetings with people who look angry. Yesterday, someone came to the house looking for him, and Mom was terrified." The bookstore suddenly felt too small, too safe. The life I'd been building with Sophie and Daniel seemed fragile against the looming shadow of family crisis. "What kind of trouble?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "I'm not sure. Something about a construction project, and people got hurt, and now there might be a lawsuit. Dad's been talking about you, saying he needs someone with business education to help sort through the legal papers. Mom thinks he might try to contact you." After what he said, after cutting me off completely, "He's desperate, Mandy, scared. I've never seen him like this before." I hung up feeling sick to my stomach. The peaceful months at the bookstore had helped me heal from the trauma of that terrible graduation night, but they hadn't resolved anything. The family crisis I'd walked away from was apparently growing larger and more complicated, threatening to pull me back into a world I'd worked so hard to escape. Sophie found me sitting in the children's section that evening, staring at picture books without really seeing them. "Jake called," I said without preamble. She settled into the reading chair across from me, her expression understanding. "What did he say?" I told her everything the business troubles the lawyers father's apparent need for someone with my educational background. Sophie listened with the same careful attention she'd shown in the hospital, letting me work through my thoughts without rushing to offer advice. "What are you thinking?" she asked finally. "I'm thinking that part of me wants to help and another part wants to run as far away as possible." Both reactions make sense. Is that what you would do if your family needed you even after everything that happened? Sophie was quiet for a long moment, considering her words carefully. 15 years ago, I might have gone back. Pride and anger would have won out over practical sense. But now I'd want to know exactly what I was walking into, and I'd set very clear terms about what help looked like. "You think I should consider it?" "I think you should trust your instincts. You're not the same person who walked out of that house 3 months ago. You've proven you can survive on your own build. Something meaningful, create healthy relationships. Whatever you decide, you're making the choice from a position of strength now, not desperation." That night, I lay on Sophie's fold-out couch thinking about family loyalty, forgiveness, and the difference between helping someone and allowing them to control you. The bookstore was quiet around me, filled with thousands of stories about people facing impossible choices and finding ways forward. I still didn't know what I'd do if Father actually reached out, but for the first time since Jake's call, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early September. I was updating inventory on the computer when the bookstore's phone rang with a shrill urgency that seemed to cut through the peaceful atmosphere. "Chapter and verse books, this is Mandy." "Oh, honey." My mother's voice was barely recognizable, strained, exhausted, aged years in the months since I'd heard it last. "Thank goodness you're there." My hands stopped moving across the keyboard. "Mom, I'm outside in the parking lot behind your store. Would it be possible for us to talk?" Through the back window, I could see a silver sedan that definitely hadn't been there when I'd arrived that morning. My mother sat behind the wheel phone pressed to her ear, looking small and fragile in the driver's seat. "Come in through the back door," I said, my voice steadier than my racing heartbeat. Patricia Sullivan entered the bookstore like she was stepping into a foreign country. Her hair, always perfectly styled for Father's business events, hung limp around her shoulders. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled as if she'd thrown them on without her usual careful attention. Most shocking were her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow, filled with a kind of desperate exhaustion I'd never seen before. "Sophie's at the bank," I said, gesturing toward the reading chair. "We can talk privately." She sat down carefully, clutching her purse like a lifeline. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, filled with months of unspoken pain and accusations. "You look healthy," she said, finally studying my face with maternal concern. "I was so worried. When you left that night and your father canceled everything, I didn't know how you'd manage." I managed. The words came out harder than I'd intended. "Jake told me about the hospital, about living in your car. I wanted to help, but your father—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Father what?" I pressed. "Forbade you from helping your own daughter." Her silence was answer enough. "Why are you here now? Mom Jake said there were problems with the business." The floodgates opened. Patricia's carefully controlled composure crumbled as she told me about the lawsuit threatening to destroy everything Father had built. A construction project from 2 years earlier, a shopping complex downtown, had been built with substandard materials and improper safety measures. During a winter storm last December, part of the roof had collapsed, injuring 6 workers and 1 shopper. The victims were now suing for millions in damages, claiming negligent construction practices. "The lawyers say we could lose everything," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "The house, the business, all our savings. Your father's insurance company is claiming fraud, saying he deliberately cut corners to increase profits. There are criminal investigators asking questions about bribes to building inspectors." The scope of the crisis was staggering. Father's construction empire, built over 30 years, was collapsing under the weight of his own greed and corner-cutting practices. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Your father sent me here to ask for your help. He needs someone with business education to review contracts, organize financial records, help coordinate with the lawyers, someone he can trust. The irony was breathtaking. Someone he can trust, he disowned me, Mom, cut me off without warning because I wouldn't marry a stranger for his business convenience. I know, sweetheart. I know how wrong that was. Patricia's voice broke. But you're his daughter. You're the smartest person in the family, and right now you might be the only one who can save us. Save you from what exactly? The consequences of his own actions. Save Jake's college fund. Save the house I've lived in for 25 years. Save the family business that employs 43 people who've done nothing wrong. Her desperation was palpable. Your father's pride is destroying everything. He won't admit he needs help, but he does, desperately. I stood up, pacing between the bookshelves as conflicting emotions warred inside me. Part of me wanted to tell my mother exactly where Father could go with his request for help, but another part, the part that still loved my family despite everything, couldn't ignore the human cost of his potential downfall. What exactly is he offering? I asked. Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a restored credit card and a thick envelope. Full financial support restored, access to family accounts. He's also prepared to make you an official employee of the business with signing authority for contracts and legal documents. And if I fix his problems, what then? Her silence stretched too long. He plans to push me out again once the crisis is over, doesn't he? I don't know, she whispered. Honestly, I don't know what he's thinking anymore. He spends hours locked in his office shouting at lawyers on the phone. He barely sleeps, hardly eats. This situation is killing him. Good, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Mandy. I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm not sorry he's finally facing consequences for his actions. Do you know what these past few months have been like? Sleeping in my car, working minimum wage jobs, living on $3 meals because your husband decided I was expendable. So I tried to convince him. You tried. You tried. My voice rose with months of suppressed anger. You stood there while he threw me out. You watched him cut off my financial support without saying a word. You let him treat me like property to be traded for business advantages. Patricia dissolved into sobs, her whole body shaking with the weight of guilt and regret. I was scared. I've always been scared of him when he gets angry. After you left, he was furious for weeks. Any mention of your name sent him into rages. I thought if I waited, if I gave him time to calm down. Time to calm down. It's been 4 months, Mom. I know I failed you. I've been failing you for years, letting him control every aspect of our lives, never standing up when I should have. She looked up at me with eyes that held decades of suppressed pain. I've been coming here for weeks, buying books, talking to Sophie about you. She's been telling me things I should have said years ago about setting boundaries and finding my own strength. The admission caught me off guard. You've been talking to Sophie. She's helped me understand some things about myself, about our family, about how I lost myself trying to keep peace with a man who views compromise as weakness. Patricia straightened slightly, some steel returning to her voice. I'm not here just because your father sent me Mandy. I'm here because I love you and because I think you might be the only person strong enough to save our family without destroying yourself in the process. I need time to think. Of course. But please consider it. Not for him, for Jake. For me, for all the innocent people who'll lose their jobs if the business fails. She stood up, gathering her purse and composure. Your Aunt Sophie is a wise woman. I understand now why your father was so threatened by her independence all those years ago. After she left, I sat alone in the bookstore trying to process everything I'd heard. The family crisis was worse than Jake had described. Father wasn't just in legal trouble, he was facing complete financial ruin and possible criminal charges. The business that had been his identity and pride for 3 decades could disappear within months. Sophie returned from the bank to find me staring out the window, lost in thought. "Your mother was here," I said without turning around. "I suspected she might visit soon. She's been building up courage for weeks." "You knew about Father's troubles." "Some of it. Patricia's been working through a lot of complicated feelings about her marriage and her role in family dynamics. This crisis has forced her to confront some difficult truths about herself." I told Sophie about the lawsuit, the potential criminal charges, the request for help. She listened with the same careful attention she always gave, asking clarifying questions but avoiding immediate judgment. "What's your instinct telling you?" she asked when I finished. "That this could be a trap, that helping him might just enable more of the same controlling behavior." I paused, considering, but also that maybe this is an opportunity to establish a different kind of relationship with my family, one where I have real power instead of just the illusion of independence. Those aren't mutually exclusive concerns. "No, they're not," I turned to face her. "What would you do?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words. 15 years ago, I would have said no out of pure stubbornness and let the consequences fall where they may. Today, I might consider it, but only with very specific conditions and legal protections in place, such as complete financial transparency, legal documents guaranteeing your authority and decision-making power, written agreements about your role and compensation, most importantly, clear boundaries about what happens after the crisis is resolved. You think I should do it? I think you should trust yourself to know what feels right. You're not the same person who left that house in May. You've proven you can survive independently, build meaningful relationships, and create value through your own efforts. Whatever you decide, you're making the choice from a position of strength. That evening, Daniel stopped by after school as he often did. I told him about my mother's visit and the impossible choice I was facing. He listened with the same thoughtful attention he gave his students, asking questions that helped me clarify my own thinking. "Do you want to help them?" he asked finally. "Part of me does. Despite everything, they're still my family, and there are other people involved, employees, Jake's future, even my mother's well-being. But I'm terrified of falling back into old patterns, of letting Father's need for control override my newfound independence." Daniel reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. "Then don't let that happen. If you decide to help, do it on your terms. Set boundaries and stick to them. Use this crisis as an opportunity to establish a healthier relationship with your family. And if he refuses my conditions, then you walk away knowing you offered help in good faith, and whatever happens next is his choice, not your responsibility." That night, I made my decision. I would help my family, but only if Father agreed to very specific terms. This crisis might be the leverage I needed to finally establish an adult relationship with him, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I had no idea that the worst betrayals were still ahead of me. The meeting took place at the family house on a Saturday morning in mid-September. Sophie drove me there, offering moral support and serving as a witness to whatever agreements we might reach. Seeing the Sullivan mansion again after 4 months felt surreal. The manicured lawn, the circular driveway, the imposing facade that had once represented security and comfort now seemed more like a fortress designed to keep the world at bay. Father answered the door himself, which immediately told me how desperate the situation had become. Marcus Sullivan never answered his own door when household staff could do it for him. He looked terrible, 20 pounds thinner, his face gaunt with stress lines I'd never noticed before. His usually perfect business attire was wrinkled, his silver hair uncombed. The man who had always projected absolute control and confidence appeared broken. "Mandy." His voice was hoarse with exhaustion. "Thank you for coming." "Sophie comes with me or I leave right now," I said before he could object to my aunt's presence. "Of course, please both of you come in." The house felt different too. Where it had once been filled with the quiet efficiency of domestic staff, now it seemed empty and echoing. Patricia met us in the living room looking marginally better than she had at the bookstore, but still fragile. Jake sat in the corner, now 18, and preparing for his senior year, watching the family drama with the analytical eyes of someone forced to mature too quickly. Let's get one thing clear from the start, I said, taking control of the conversation before Father could establish his usual dominance. I'm not here as your daughter asking for forgiveness or hoping for reconciliation. I'm here as a business consultant considering whether to take on a client. Everything we discuss will be evaluated from that perspective. Father's jaw tightened clearly, not how he'd envisioned this conversation beginning, but he nodded agreement. Tell me about the lawsuit, I continued. For the next hour, Father laid out the full scope of his legal problems. The Riverside shopping complex had been his biggest project of the previous decade, a $15 million development that was supposed to establish his company as a major regional player. To maximize profits, he'd cut corners on materials, rushed construction timelines, and paid bribes to building inspectors to overlook safety violations. The roof collapse in December had been catastrophic but not fatal, a small mercy that had probably saved him from manslaughter charges. 6 construction workers had been injured, one critically. A pregnant shopper had been struck by falling debris requiring emergency surgery that had saved her life but endangered her pregnancy. The medical bills alone were approaching $2 million. The victim's lawyers are seeking $30 million in damages. Father explained, his voice hollow. My insurance company is refusing coverage, claiming deliberate fraud voids the policy. The state attorney general's office is conducting a criminal investigation into bribery and construction fraud. Show me the financial records, I demanded. The next 3 hours were a crash course in corporate malfeasance. Father's company books revealed a pattern of corner cutting that went back years, not just on the Riverside project. Substandard materials purchased from uncertified suppliers. Workers paid under the table to avoid insurance and safety requirements. Building inspectors receiving monthly consulting fees that bore no relationship to any actual services. This isn't just about one bad project, I said, reviewing bank statements that showed suspicious cash withdrawals and unexplained payments. You've been running a criminal enterprise disguised as a construction company. That's not fair, Father protested. Every contractor in this region operates the same way. The regulations are impossible to follow while maintaining competitive pricing. So you decided the rules didn't apply to you. His silence was answer enough. Sophie had remained quiet during the financial review, but I could see her taking mental notes of everything she was hearing. Her presence grounded me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this room where I'd once felt so powerless. Here are my conditions, I said, finally pulling out a legal pad where I'd written my requirements. First, I want complete financial authority over the company during this crisis. All contracts, all payments, all major decisions run through me. Absolutely not, Father said immediately. This is still my company. Then handle your own legal problems. I stood up to leave. Wait, Patricia's voice cut through the tension. Marcus, listen to what she's saying. Second, I continued, sitting back down. I want everything in writing. A formal contract outlining my role, my authority, and my compensation. Third, I want transparency with all employees about the company's situation and my role in addressing it. No more secrets, no more lies. What kind of compensation are you talking about? Jake asked, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. $50,000 to take the job plus 5% ownership in the company if I successfully resolve the legal crisis without criminal charges being filed. Father's face turned purple. 5%, that company is worth millions. Was worth millions, I corrected. Right now, it's worth negative $30 million and falling. If you don't like my terms, hire someone else with business expertise who'll work for free out of family loyalty. The room fell silent as Father grappled with his limited options. He could reject my conditions and face bankruptcy alone, or accept them and retain some chance of saving his life's work. There's something else, Patricia said quietly. something we haven't told you yet." The look that passed between my parents made my stomach drop. "What now?" Father cleared his throat suddenly, unable to meet my eyes. "Robert Hastings, the lawyer representing us, has a son, Michael. He's 32, recently divorced, and looking to settle down again." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "No, absolutely not." "Just hear us out," Father pleaded. "Michael is a successful attorney in his own right. He's interested in you, and his father has indicated that a marriage alliance might influence how aggressively they pursue our defense. You're trying to pimp me out to our lawyer's son while asking for my help saving the business." "It's not like that," Patricia said desperately. "It's just a practical consideration. Michael seems like a nice man, and you'll be working closely with their firm anyway." I stood up so fast the chair fell backward. "I can't believe this. I cannot believe that even in the middle of a crisis that could destroy our family, you're still trying to control my personal life for business advantages." "Mandy, please," Father said. "Just meet with him. One dinner. See if there might be potential for something mutually beneficial." Sophie finally spoke, her voice ice cold. "Marcus, you haven't changed at all. Still trying to trade your daughter's autonomy for business advantages." "This is different," he protested. "This is exactly the same," I said, grabbing my purse and heading for the door. "The only difference is now you're desperate enough to be honest about what you're really asking for." "Wait." Jake jumped up, blocking my path. "Don't leave again, please. I know they're being idiotic about this marriage thing, but the business problems are real. 43 people are going to lose their jobs if the company fails. Mom will lose the house. My college fund will disappear." The pain in my younger brother's voice stopped me cold. At 18, he was caught between his loyalty to me and his terror about his family's future. None of this was his fault. "I need 24 hours to think," I said finally. "Of course," Father agreed quickly. "Take whatever time you need. And I want to meet with the lawyers myself without any of you present to get an independent assessment of the legal situation. I'll arrange it immediately." Walking out of that house for the second time in 4 months felt different than the first. This time, I wasn't running away from an impossible situation. I was walking away from a negotiation where I held most of the cards. The question was whether I was strong enough to use that leverage without losing myself in the process. Sophie and I drove home in silence, both processing what we'd just experienced. "Well," she said finally, "your father certainly knows how to make a bad situation worse." The marriage proposal was insane, but the business crisis is real and Jake doesn't deserve to suffer for father's mistakes. "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I might take the job, but only if father agrees to all my conditions and drops any mention of marriage arrangements. This could be my chance to finally establish an adult relationship with him where I have real power. And if he refuses, then I walk away and let him face the consequences of his own choices." That evening, Daniel came over to Sophie's apartment and listened to the full account of the family meeting. His reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "The marriage proposal is completely unacceptable, but you already know that. The question is whether you can trust your father to honor any agreement you make with him." "I can't trust him based on past behavior," I admitted. "But maybe the crisis has changed the power dynamics enough that trust isn't necessary. If I have legal contracts and real authority, his trustworthiness becomes less relevant. Just promise me you'll be careful. Desperate people make dangerous decisions, and your father has already shown he's willing to sacrifice your well-being for his business interests." I promised, though I suspected the challenges ahead were bigger than any of us imagined. The call came from father's lawyer the next morning, setting up a private meeting for that afternoon. I was about to get an independent assessment of just how much trouble Marcus Sullivan was really in. The law offices of Hastings and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of downtown's tallest building, all glass and marble, and understated wealth. Robert Hastings himself was a silver-haired man in his 60s. with the practiced charm of someone who'd spent decades convincing juries and negotiating settlements. His son Michael sat beside him during our meeting, tall, well-dressed, conventionally handsome in the way that suggested good breeding and expensive dental work. "Ms. Sullivan, Robert Hastings began. Your father has briefed us on your business education and your willingness to help coordinate his defense. We appreciate any assistance you can provide during this challenging time. I'm here to get an independent assessment of the legal situation," I said, ignoring Michael's obvious attempts to catch my eye. My family's description of events may be colored by panic and wishful thinking. Robert's expression turned serious. "Unfortunately, the situation is as grave as your father described, possibly worse. The evidence of construction fraud is overwhelming. Substandard materials, bribed inspectors, falsified safety reports, the state attorney general has built a compelling case." He spread documents across the conference table, bank records showing suspicious payments, inspection reports with obvious falsifications, medical records from the injured victims. The scope of father's illegal activities was staggering and well documented. "What are we looking at in terms of potential criminal charges?" I asked. "Fraud, bribery, reckless endangerment, possibly attempted manslaughter if the prosecution can prove he knew the construction was unsafe. We're talking about potential federal charges that could result in 10 to 20 years in prison." The room felt cold despite the afternoon sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "And the civil lawsuit? $30 million in damages, but that could increase if more victims come forward or if punitive damages are awarded. Your father's insurance company has already filed suit to void his policy based on fraud, so he'll be personally liable for any judgment." Michael leaned forward, his voice smooth and practiced. "However, there might be ways to mitigate both the criminal and civil exposure if we can demonstrate genuine cooperation and restitution efforts." "What kind of cooperation?" "Full financial disclosure, voluntary compliance with safety regulations going forward, possibly testimony against other contractors engaged in similar practices." Robert's tone was carefully neutral. Of course, such cooperation would require someone with business expertise to coordinate the company's response. The pitch was obvious they wanted me to help build father's defense while simultaneously dating his lawyer's son. I wondered if they'd discussed this strategy in advance or if it had emerged organically from their mutual self-interest. "I'd be happy to discuss the coordination role over dinner," Michael said with what was probably meant to be a charming smile. "There are aspects of the legal strategy that might be easier to explain in a more relaxed setting." "I'm sure there are," I replied dryly. The meeting lasted another hour, covering financial projections, timeline estimates, and potential plea bargain scenarios. By the end, I had a clear understanding of father's situation. He was facing complete personal and professional destruction, unless someone with business skills could help navigate the legal process. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on me. Helping father might save the family business and keep innocent employees from losing their jobs, but it would also mean working closely with lawyers who clearly viewed me as a potential romantic asset rather than a professional consultant. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "Dad's been in his office all day waiting to hear from you. Mom's pacing around the house like a caged animal. Please tell me you're going to help." That evening, I called father and gave him my answer. "I'll take the job, but only under the conditions I outlined yesterday. And there will be no social interactions with Michael Hastings or anyone else you've decided might be suitable husband material." "Agreed," father said quickly. "Completely agreed. When can you start?" "Tomorrow morning. I want complete access to all financial records, all legal documents, and all communication with employees. And I want the contract terms in writing before I begin any work." "Of course. Thank you, sweetheart. You don't know how much this means to me." The endearment caught me off guard. Father hadn't called me sweetheart since childhood. Despite everything, part of me still wanted his approval and affection. That vulnerability scared me more than any legal crisis. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of financial analysis, legal coordination, and damage control. I worked 16-hour days reviewing contracts, organizing evidence, and implementing new safety protocols across all company projects. The business had been hemorrhaging money through legal fees and halted construction, but systematic analysis revealed ways to cut costs without destroying operations entirely. Working with the employees was both challenging and rewarding. Many had known me since childhood, watching me grow up around construction sites and company picnics. They were confused by my sudden authority, but grateful that someone was fighting to save their jobs. I held weekly meetings explaining the situation, honestly outlining steps being taken to address legal issues and answering questions about job security. "Your father never talked to us directly about problems," said Tom Walsh, the senior foreman who'd worked for the company for 15 years. "It's good to know what's really happening instead of just hearing rumors." The legal work was more complex. Robert Hastings had developed a defense strategy based on cooperation and restitution. Father would accept responsibility for construction shortcuts, while arguing that industry-wide practices had normalized such behavior. It wasn't a perfect defense, but it offered a path toward plea negotiations that might avoid the most serious criminal charges. "You've done remarkable work organizing our case materials," Robert told me during a strategy meeting in October. "Your business background is exactly what we needed to make sense of the financial complexities." Michael continued making social overtures despite my clear lack of interest. Lunch invitations offers to explain legal procedures over dinner suggestions that we collaborate on certain aspects of the defense strategy. I deflected them all professionally, but firmly focusing on the work that needed to be done. Father seemed genuinely grateful for my efforts and respectful of the authority I'd demanded. He deferred to my financial decisions, supported my communication with employees, and never questioned my methods for organizing the legal defense. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like he saw me as a competent professional, rather than just a daughter to be controlled and protected. "I should have asked for your help years ago," he said one evening as we reviewed settlement negotiations. "You understand this business better than I gave you credit for." The comment felt like vindication for every argument we'd ever had about my independence and capabilities. By November, we had made significant progress. Criminal charges were still possible, but plea negotiations were moving toward a resolution that would avoid prison time in exchange for financial restitution and industry testimony. The civil lawsuit remained expensive, but we'd reduce the potential damages through victim outreach and voluntary compensation offers. Most importantly, the business was stabilizing. New contracts with stricter safety protocols were generating revenue again. Employee morale had improved through honest communication and job security. We weren't out of danger, but the company might actually survive. That's when I discovered the betrayal that would change everything. I was working late on a Thursday evening reviewing insurance documents in Father's office when I found the hidden folder. It was wedged behind his desk filing cabinet, filled with documents that hadn't been disclosed to me or the lawyers. The first document was a preliminary sale agreement with Morrison Construction, our biggest regional competitor. Father had been secretly negotiating to sell the company assets while publicly fighting to save it. The sale price was $42 million, enough to pay legal settlements and leave him with substantial personal wealth. But the sale terms were what made me sick to my stomach. Morrison would acquire all physical assets, ongoing contracts, and the Sullivan Construction name. However, they had no obligation to retain existing employees or honor current benefit packages. 43 people who trusted me to save their jobs would be fired or demoted within months of the sale. The second document was worse, a new will that excluded me from any inheritance while establishing a trust fund controlled by Father's business associates. Even if I successfully saved the company, I would receive nothing beyond my contracted consultation fee. The third document was a marriage contract. Yes, a literal marriage contract between the Sullivan and Hastings families, outlining financial arrangements for a union between Michael Hastings and myself. Father's legal fees would be forgiven. Michael would receive a percentage of the business sale proceeds, and I would be bound by prenuptial agreements that gave me no actual control over family assets. I sat in that office until 3 a.m, reading through pages of documents that revealed the full scope of Father's deception. Every promise he'd made, every concession to my authority, every expression of respect and gratitude, all lies designed to keep me working while he arranged to sell everything out from under me. The next morning, I arrived at the office before anyone else and made copies of every document in the hidden folder. Then I called an emergency meeting with all senior employees, the lawyers, and my family. "I've discovered some information that changes our situation dramatically," I announced when everyone had assembled in the conference room. I laid out the secret sale negotiations, the plans to eliminate employee positions, and the marriage contract arrangements. 43 people who had trusted me to save their jobs learned that their employer had been planning to betray them from the beginning. The room erupted in angry voices and shocked accusations. Tom Walsh stood up, his face red with fury. "You've been lying to us for months while we busted our asses trying to save this company." "It wasn't me," I said quickly. "I just discovered these documents last night." Robert Hastings looked mortified. "Marcus, we never discussed any of these arrangements. A secret asset sale could completely undermine our legal defense strategy." Father sat at the head of the table, his expression shifting from surprise to resignation to desperate calculation. For a moment, I thought he might deny everything or claim the documents were outdated drafts. Instead, he did something worse. He tried to justify it. "The sale to Morrison is a backup plan," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "If our legal defense fails, at least some value can be preserved for the family." "By destroying the lives of everyone who works here," Tom demanded. "Business is about making hard choices. I'm trying to protect what I can." "And the marriage contract?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Father's eyes met mine across the table. "Michael is a good man from a respected family. The arrangement would provide security for you and strengthen our legal position." "You mean it would forgive your legal fees and give you access to the Hastings family wealth?" "It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." I stood up slowly, every eye in the room focused on me. For months, I'd been fighting to save this man's business, protect these people's jobs, and rebuild a relationship with my family. All while, he'd been planning to sell everything and arrange my marriage for his financial benefit. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice carrying across the silent conference room. "Business is about making hard choices." I gathered the copied documents and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Father called after me. "To make some hard choices of my own." The room was still silent as I left, but I could feel the weight of 43 people watching me go. They were depending on me to find a solution that would preserve their livelihoods and dignity. Father had proven he was willing to sacrifice them for personal gain. It was time to show him what betrayal actually looked like. I spent that weekend locked in Sophie's apartment, surrounded by legal documents, financial records, and the kind of strategic planning that my business degree had prepared me for, but I'd never imagined using against my own family. Daniel brought coffee and encouragement, while Sophie provided the cold, analytical perspective that comes from surviving family betrayal. "What exactly are you thinking?" Sophie asked as I spread papers across her kitchen table. "I'm thinking that Father taught me more about business than he realized, including how to identify opportunities when someone else makes strategic mistakes." The plan I developed over those 2 days was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. Father had given me complete financial authority and signing power for company operations. The contracts he'd demanded were legally binding and irrevocable during the crisis period. He'd essentially handed me the tools to take control of everything he'd been trying to protect. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early and called an emergency meeting with senior employees. Only no family members, no lawyers, no one whose primary loyalty was to Marcus Sullivan rather than Sullivan Construction. "I want to buy the company," I announced without preamble. Tom Walsh nearly choked on his coffee. Buy it with what money? With a combination of employee investment, small business loans, and assumption of existing debts. Morrison was willing to pay $42 million for assets, but they were planning to gut operations and eliminate jobs. We can structure a buyout for significantly less money if we're not focused on extracting maximum profit. I laid out a proposal that I'd been developing since discovering Father's betrayal. Current employees could purchase ownership stakes based on their length of service and position. The company would assume responsibility for legal settlements, but implement the safety and ethical reforms I'd already begun. Most importantly, job security and benefit packages would be protected under the new ownership structure. "You're talking about converting us from employees to owners," said Maria Santos, the office manager who'd been with the company for 12 years. "Exactly. Instead of working to build wealth for someone who's demonstrated he'll sacrifice your interests for personal gain, you'll be working to build wealth for yourselves and your families." The response was enthusiastic but cautious. These were people who'd spent their careers in traditional employment relationships, not worker-owned cooperatives. But they'd also just learned that their current employer had been planning to discard them, which provided strong motivation to consider alternatives. "What about your father?" asked Jerry Kim, the senior project manager. "He's not just going to hand over the company because you ask nicely. He's not going to have a choice. I have complete financial authority until the legal crisis is resolved. I can initiate an employee buyout using that authority, and he can either accept the terms or face bankruptcy." The next step was securing financing. I spent Tuesday morning at First National Bank presenting a business plan for the employee buyout to Linda Patterson, the commercial loan officer who'd been handling Sullivan Construction's accounts for years. "This is ambitious," Linda said, reviewing my projections. "Employee ownership models can be successful, but they require strong management and unified commitment from all participants. The alternative is bankruptcy and job loss. That provides pretty strong incentive for unified commitment." The financial structure I'd proposed was complex but viable. The bank would provide a $5 million loan, backed by company assets and guaranteed by employee investment contributions. Existing legal settlements would be paid through structured payments over 5 years. The total buyout cost would be $18 million, less than half what Morrison had offered, but enough to satisfy Father's creditors and provide him with modest compensation for his lifetime of work. "We'll need detailed financial projections and individual employment agreements with all participating employees," Linda said. "But preliminary approval shouldn't be difficult given your family's history with this bank." Wednesday morning, I presented the buyout proposal to Father, Mother, and Jake in the conference room, where I discovered his betrayal just 5 days earlier. Robert Hastings attended as legal counsel, his expression carefully neutral as I outlined terms that would strip his client of most negotiating power. "This is ridiculous," Father said when I finished. "You can't just steal my company because you disagree with my business decisions." "I'm not stealing anything. I'm exercising the financial authority you granted me to preserve company operations and protect employee interests. That authority was meant to help save the business for our family. The business will be saved, just not for you to sell to Morrison while destroying the lives of everyone who works here." Robert Hastings cleared his throat diplomatically. Marcus, the contracts Mandy negotiated, did give her broad financial powers during the crisis period. If she can secure legitimate financing for an employee buyout, you might not have legal grounds to prevent it. "Whose side are you on?" Father demanded. "I'm on the side of protecting you from criminal prosecution and minimizing your financial exposure," Robert replied. "This buyout proposal accomplishes both goals while providing you with fair compensation for your assets." The argument continued for 2 hours, with Father alternately threatening lawsuits, questioning my competence, and appealing to family loyalty. But the legal reality was unavoidable. I held the cards, and he had no choice but to accept my terms or face complete financial destruction. "What about the marriage arrangement with Michael?" Father asked desperately. What about it? I'm 23 years old, financially independent, and perfectly capable of making my own decisions about romance. If Michael wants to ask me out, he can do it without a business contract attached. You're destroying everything I've built. No, I'm saving everything you've built while removing your ability to destroy it for personal gain. The final settlement was signed on Friday afternoon. Marcus Sullivan would receive $8.5 million in exchange for transferring all company assets to the employee ownership cooperative. Legal settlements would be paid through the new business structure, and Father would provide testimony in criminal proceedings to avoid prosecution. He would have no ongoing role in company operations. Most importantly for me, the marriage contract with the Hastings family was voided, and all attempts to control my personal life were formally renounced. I hope you're satisfied, Father said as we left the law office after signing the final papers. I'm satisfied that 43 families will keep their jobs and benefits. I'm satisfied that this company will operate ethically going forward. I'm satisfied that I'll never again be treated as property to be traded for business advantages. And our relationship. The question hung in the air between us. Despite everything, the graduation night betrayal, the months of financial abandonment, the recent deception and manipulation part of me, still wanted a relationship with my father. But not the relationship we'd always had, built on his control and my dependence. That depends entirely on whether you can accept me as an equal adult rather than a subordinate daughter, I said finally. The transformation of Sullivan Construction into a worker-owned cooperative took 6 months to complete. We restructured operations around democratic decision-making, profit-sharing, and long-term sustainability rather than maximum short-term extraction. Safety became the highest priority with transparent reporting and regular training that exceeded industry standards. The financial results were better than anyone had projected. When employees own their workplace, they care about efficiency, quality, and customer satisfaction in ways that benefit everyone. The company's reputation improved dramatically, leading to new contracts and expanded operations. My role evolved from crisis manager to general manager, elected by my fellow owners and accountable to them for all major decisions. The responsibility was challenging, but rewarding in ways I'd never experienced working for someone else's profit. Daniel and I were married in the bookstore the following spring, surrounded by friends, family, and co-workers who'd become a chosen community. Father attended the ceremony looking uncomfortable, but making an effort to participate appropriately. Mother had filed for divorce and was teaching elementary school again, radiating a joy and confidence I'd never seen in her before. Jake graduated high school with honors and chose engineering school on a merit scholarship, proud to be building his own future rather than inheriting someone else's empire. The most surprising development was Father's gradual transformation. Losing his business and confronting the consequences of his actions had forced him into therapy and genuine self-reflection. He began attending family events without trying to dominate conversations. He asked questions about my work instead of offering unsolicited advice. He even started volunteering with a local nonprofit that helped other business owners navigate ethical challenges. I spent 30 years thinking that control and love were the same thing. He told me during one of our monthly coffee meetings that had replaced the formal family dinners of my childhood. It took losing everything to understand that real love means trusting people to make their own choices. The conversation was happening at Chapter and Verse Books, which had tripled in size thanks to Sophie's partnership with the construction cooperative for renovation work. The store had become a community gathering place, hosting book clubs, author events, and business networking meetings. I'm proud of what you've built, Father continued, gesturing toward the bustling bookstore, where customers browsed among displays I'd designed and books Sophie had selected. Not just the business success, but the way you've treated people with dignity and respect throughout this process. I learned from your mistakes, I said not unkindly. I'm grateful you did. 2 years after the crisis began, I received a phone call that brought everything full circle. Robert Hastings was retiring, and his son Michael had been struggling to maintain the family law practice without his father's institutional relationships and business development skills. "I have a proposition for you," Michael said over the phone. "Our firm needs someone with business expertise to help manage operations and client relationships. Would you consider consulting with us on a restructuring project?" The irony was perfect. The man who'd once been offered to me as a marriage arrangement was now asking for my professional services to save his failing business. "I'll consider it," I said, "but any working relationship would be strictly professional with clear contracts and defined scope of work." Of course, I wouldn't expect anything else. The consulting project was successful enough to establish an ongoing relationship between our companies. Michael proved to be competent and respectful in professional settings, though he never again suggested mixing business with romance. Some lessons apparently can be learned. On a warm evening in late summer, I sat in the bookstore after closing time, reviewing financial reports that showed another quarter of strong growth for both the construction cooperative and Sophie's expanding retail business. Daniel was grading papers at a nearby table, occasionally looking up to share amusing student comments or ask questions about profit distribution calculations. "Any regrets?" Sophie asked, settling into her favorite reading chair with a cup of tea. "About what specifically?" "About staying here instead of moving to a big city using your degree for some corporate position that would have paid twice what you're making now." I considered the question seriously. My college classmates were working for major corporations, earning impressive salaries, building conventional careers in business centers across the country. Sometimes I wondered what my life might have looked like if I'd followed that path instead of staying to fight for my family and community. "No regrets," I said finally. "This work matters in ways that go beyond personal success. We've proven that businesses can operate ethically while still being profitable. We've shown that employee ownership creates better outcomes for everyone involved. And we've built something that will last longer than any individual career. Even if it means dealing with family drama and small-town politics, especially because of that, real change happens when people work together to solve problems in their own communities, not when they escape to somewhere easier." Daniel looked up from his papers. Besides, where else could she have married a devastatingly handsome elementary school teacher and lived above a bookstore filled with every novel ever written? "Point taken," Sophie laughed. As I locked up the store that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this place. 2 years earlier, I'd been a recent college graduate with no real understanding of my own strength or capabilities. The crisis that had driven me from home had also forced me to discover who I was when stripped of financial security and family support. The woman who'd slept in her car and worked minimum-wage jobs to survive was the same person now managing a multi-million-dollar business and making decisions that affected dozens of families. But the growth between those 2 points had required learning to fight for myself and others in ways I'd never imagined necessary. Standing outside the bookstore looking up at the apartment where I'd found refuge and family with Sophie, I realized that getting kicked out of my childhood home had been the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because the experience had been easy or pleasant, but because it had forced me to become the person I'd always had the potential to be. 6 months later, Father called to congratulate me on winning the Regional Business Ethics Award for Sullivan Construction Cooperative. His voice held genuine pride and respect, not the patronizing tone of someone surprised by my success, but the warm appreciation of someone who'd learned to see me clearly. "I have something to tell you," he said toward the end of our conversation. "What's that?" "I'm proud to be your father. Not because of what you've accomplished, though that's remarkable, but because of how you've accomplished it with integrity and compassion for everyone involved." "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." It was the first time I'd called him Dad instead of Father in over 2 years. The word felt different now, not weighted with fear and resentment, but chosen freely as an expression of genuine affection for the man he was becoming. That evening, as Daniel and I walked home from the awards ceremony, I thought about the question Sophie had asked months earlier about regrets. The path from that terrible graduation night to this moment of recognition and family healing had been more difficult than anything I'd imagined when I was planning my post-college life. But it had also taught me that sometimes the most important victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from refusing to let other people's limitations define your own possibilities. Sometimes love means walking away from people who hurt you, and sometimes it means staying to fight for something better. Most importantly, I'd learned that real independence isn't about rejecting all connections to family and community. It's about choosing those connections freely on terms of mutual respect rather than control or dependency. Standing outside our bookstore home, looking up at windows glowing with warm light, I knew I'd made the right choice to stay and fight, not just for myself, but for everyone whose life had been changed by one woman's refusal to accept that being someone's daughter meant being their property. The card had stopped working because I'd stopped being the kind of person who needed someone else's permission to build a meaningful life. What I'd said next had left them speechless because it came from a strength they'd never seen in me before, the strength to demand respect instead of asking for approval, to create value instead of accepting dependence, and to love my family enough to refuse their attempts to diminish my potential. That strength had changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone whose life I'd been able to touch through the work we'd built together. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is say no to the life other people want to choose for you, and yes to the possibility that you might be capable of something extraordinary. Thank you for joining me on this journey of discovering that family love doesn't require sacrificing your independence, that business success doesn't require sacrificing your integrity, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well on your own terms. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and personal autonomy? What would you have done in my situation? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Give this video a like if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Until next time, remember that your worth is never determined by other people's ability to control you.